usually takes like a minute or two for the stream to go live. Yeah, and I think we should be golden. Usually takes like a minute or two for the stream to go. And the echo confirms that YouTube is streaming. So
Okay.
right. Recording. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this series of live streams featuring the Technical Oversight Committee members. So, the Cloud Foundry Foundation recently moved to a governance model where we have a Technical Oversight Committee who basically oversee all things technical for on behalf of the foundation. So, what we've been doing is having um, each of them feature on a live stream and basically have a conversation about Cloud Foundry, how it goes right now, what are some of the changes that we can expect um, soon, and some of the visions and the missions that people have. And the reason we are having all of them sort of feature individually is to just add that flavor of what each one would uniquely bring to the table of sorts. So today features one of my uh, favorite members of the committee. Not to be partial or anything, but we have Eric today with us. I consider Eric sort of the Gandalf of the community. He always has a solution to some of the problems that I have. So yeah, welcome Eric. It's a pleasure to have you here on the stream today with us.
Great. Thanks for inviting me, Ram. It's great to be invited onto the live stream and to talk with you.
Great. Why don't we just kick things off with like a quick introduction of who you are, what you do, and try and educate us a little bit about how you work with Cloud Foundry and the foundation in general.
Yeah, sure. Happy to give some background about myself. I've been involved with the Cloud Foundry community for about the past 8 years. So I actually started as a software engineer at Pivotal, working on what was then just the runtime team, which had things like Cloud Controller. Even the current code base that we have for it was around back then, although it was a lot newer. And things like the DEAs and Warden, if anyone remembers those. And so I was on the engineering side there for a couple of years. And then as we got the Diego project and components up and running, kind of switched over to more of a product management role and engineering management role for that part of the system. And so that's where I've been. I've transitioned over to those kinds of roles within Pivotal, and I've continued there as we integrated into VMware a couple of years ago. And so, on the community side, I've been involved all throughout that in terms of really helping move the application runtime forward and to demonstrate its value to the community. And then focusing on previously Pivotal and now VMware's commercial distributions of the CF app runtime as part of our product portfolio.
Awesome. Yeah, for a lot of folks who might not be aware, VMware is one of the foundation's key members. They contribute a lot in terms of engineering resources for various projects that the foundation owns. So, Eric, what are all sort of the different projects that VMware has some sort of participation in, or would it be easier just to list projects that they don't participate in? Because I think um, there's like somebody from VMware who's participating at some level or the other in a lot of the projects for the foundation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, throughout the Cloud Foundry Foundation projects, we've had really strong representation. And even back at Pivotal, we'd been among the main drivers of a lot of those projects. So I think all throughout the Cloud Foundry app runtime, for sure, we've contributed a lot to those components and those systems, and certainly at the infrastructure layer, contributed a lot to BOSH and that system of automating VMs across a variety of different types of virtualized infrastructure. And then when we some of the other projects that are in the foundation, one of those is the Open Service Broker API. Yep. That was something that was kind of developed as kind of a de facto standard inside of Cloud Foundry. But around 2016, we saw a lot of value in extracting that as a more common standard for service management that could apply across platforms. And so we led that with other folks from SAP and IBM and many of the other longtime participants in the Cloud Foundry community. And I think then even more recently, we've been spearheading the development of the Paketo buildpacks as the next generation of buildpack technology and implementations. And that's also within the Cloud Foundry community.
Awesome. There is a commercial flavor of Cloud Foundry that VMware also has, right? Could you just talk about those?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, that's right. We definitely have a commercial offering of Cloud Foundry. So that kind of comes in two different levels of infrastructure. So we've been talking a lot about BOSH and then the Cloud Foundry app runtime. We've built something that's a little bit more like an appliance around BOSH called Operations Manager. So instead of taking in BOSH releases and deployments, it uses those under the hood, but it has some more abstract things that we often just call tiles that get installed into those. And it does some work to connect those tiles together a little more automatically where they need to coordinate or to share configuration or other properties. And so within that, we then have a tile for the Cloud Foundry app runtime, which nowadays we call the Tanzu application service. We used to call it the Elastic Runtime for Pivotal Cloud Foundry back in the day, but it's gone through a couple different renames. And at this point, it's the Tanzu application service. But at its core, it's still presenting those open source Cloud Foundry interfaces, especially for development teams and for administrators that are managing orgs and spaces within an environment.
Great. And generally speaking, has your experience been more with like big teams and like enterprise grade teams that take advantage of Cloud Foundry, or has it been common to see smaller teams and startups also take advantage of what Cloud Foundry has to offer?
Yeah, well, I think we've had a bit of a mix of those over the years with the previously Pivotal and now VMware distributions of Cloud Foundry. In terms of the application service and operations manager, that's something that we really make available as a product for individual customers to manage themselves on top of their own infrastructure, which we've often seen be really important where they need to run those in, say, air-gapped environments because of security, or they need to run them in their own data centers. And they want to do that to take advantage of the virtualized systems that they have invested in there for years. And so for that product, we see a lot of adoption kind of at that larger enterprise grade scale, where they've got large central IT departments that benefit from a lot of consolidation, and then they've got tens or hundreds or even thousands of application teams that are all developing applications independently, and they want a stable, consistent platform on which to do that efficiently. But then, previously we'd had offerings that were more suitable for smaller teams as well. So we and actually a lot of other vendors have had hosted instances of the Cloud Foundry app runtime, where teams can just show up with a credit card and buy some credits and get their apps running and on the cloud in often just minutes.
Yeah, that's interesting because um, a lot of times the summits and some of the past events have, um, they tend to focus on some of the bigger implementations and speak about sort of the enterprise use case mostly. So I was just curious to dig into um, what area specifically um, could Cloud Foundry make, an impactful sort of presence in smaller companies or for smaller teams and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the great things about the level of hardening and multi-tenancy that we've built into the system, even for enterprise environments, is that that's also the exact same kinds of capabilities that you want to be able to just run a public instance of Cloud Foundry,
Right.
where those smaller teams don't have to take on any burden of administering the underlying system themselves. They can just show up and get access to an org and a space and start running their apps and provisioning services from the marketplace that's provided to them. So, again, there's a little bit less control there for them in that kind of hosted instance because the platform operator is separate from them at that point. And so they may have to take the dependencies that are offered as part of that suite of service offerings. But there's always escape hatches in the platform if they need to do something that's a little bit off the grid there. And so, I think that can still be a great option for those small teams that, they're okay running on a cloud environment where they don't need to take advantage of any of existing infrastructure because they don't have any. They're just getting started on the cloud. And that's also where I think we still see a lot of promise in terms of integrating with and adopting Kubernetes as that next wave of infrastructure for the app runtime, because that's proven to be a much more accessible level of infrastructure for smaller teams, where again they can either on their own or from a cloud provider provision a Kubernetes cluster that's pretty small, and then we want to see them being able to make more productive use of that through the abstractions that we already know are valuable as part of that CF experience.
Got it. Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into the Kubernetes infrastructure as a topic because somebody publicly posted when are Diego cells going to be replaced with Kubernetes? There was plans, as I remember. So obviously, there's people following it. So what's the shift like, Eric? Now, obviously, like I've done a bunch of CF for Kate stuff myself. Did a bit of showcasing here and there. But what was sort of the you know uh, design decisions, or what was some of the thinking when this Kubernetes shift started to happen? And could you sort of tell us the story of how we got where we are?
Yeah,
And then
sure.
I'll ask you to elaborate about where we are going. But let's just talk. Bring everybody to the present for now.
Yeah, so I think one thing that's really interesting about the connections to Kubernetes is that even if you think about a lot of the even decade-long history of Cloud Foundry, actually ties back to a lot of the same roots. So people may not be aware of this, but even the term BOSH is a little bit of a play on words. Because it actually started to originate when some folks left Google in the early 2010s, and they had really enjoyed using the Borg system there, and so they were thinking of like, oh, what's the next generation of this system look like for managing workloads across a large set of virtual machines as really the prevalent automatable infrastructure available at the time. And so people I think are familiar with the like C to C++ incrementing conventions. So they were thinking like, well, what's Borg plus plus? Well, if you increment R to S and G to H, then you get BOSH. So that's actually, I think at some point we retrofitted it as a recursive acronym to be the BOSH outer shell. But as far as I can tell, that was the origination of the term Borg, of
That's
the term
super
BOSH from
interesting.
Borg. But
That is so good.
I think if you look at the technology there, it's really built on the same kinds of ideas, where you declare the state of the world that you want to have for the system, and then you let that system converge its actual state to that desired state through effectively, we've seen this be implemented well in terms of rules engines or reconciliation engines and control loops. And so, if you start diving into the details of what BOSH is doing, and you can get through all the Ruby code that's still in the code base there, then that's really at the core of its philosophy in terms of how it's operating. And so, even back in 2012 and 2013, although BOSH had a lot of maturation still to be doing there, we saw that core reliability emerging from that design principle, just as it had in a proprietary sense at Google with Borg. And so that really drove a lot of inspiration for the Diego project, where, at the time we were having a lot of similar reliability and extensibility issues with the previous system that was coordinating containers for applications across container hosts. That was the DEAs and Warden. And some of that was the refactoring in the code base. Some of that was the choice of language. It turns out that Ruby is a very accessible language, but it's not really the best language if you're trying to implement something that's very highly parallel in terms of how it's operating. And so that was a lot of the genesis of the Diego components early in 2014, is realizing that we think the best thing to do here is to have a rewrite within this part of the system to take advantage of this then newly emerging programming language in Go that is very good at solving these kinds of concerns. But I think part of the other core tenet of that system design was designing it around those same kinds of desired state, actual observed state reconciliation loops at various points in the system. And then, of course, that's exactly the same kind of design philosophy that we've seen with Kubernetes, where, again, it took this parallel route of again, thinking like, well, what's an open source reimplementation of a system that's like Borg, but is now using the technology that we have around Docker images and Docker containers as effectively a de facto standard that's emerging in this technology space. And so, even I think as far back as 4 or even 5 years ago, we started thinking seriously about like, well, okay, we see a lot of parallels here. Even if you look at the system architecture between Diego and Kubernetes, they're very similar. And so it seems fairly natural to figure out the best way to converge those. And that's where I think we've also perceived a lot of value to unlock in terms of having Kubernetes provide that more uniform containerized substrate to run the rest of the system as well. So that instead of having kind of an inconsistent reliance on BOSH for provisioning a lot of the system components themselves, and then Diego running the app instances, you can get some more uniformity across the entire system by converging on Kubernetes. So I think even those technological considerations and design principles have really guided a lot of our thought about how we want to proceed in terms of providing things like the Cloud Foundry app runtime on top of this new wave of Kubernetes infrastructure that we increasingly see just being really dominant in that infrastructure space.
Right, and this opens two areas where I'd really like to understand where it is going forward. But you've evolved this, let's say, paradigm of having a PaaS tool operate over like virtual machines and that kind of infrastructure. And then you're now evolving the same paradigm to operate over Kubernetes-based infrastructure, which I guess behaves and works slightly differently than the VM infrastructure that you originally had. And so you now have effectively like a new tool or a new product, and then your community is essentially invested and just used to um, let's say Bosch based Cloud Foundry, and then along comes Kubernetes, and then things seem to change, and then the Cloud Foundry community is converging around a new tool. So should the Bosch based folks be worried? And the it's a two-part question. So what about the old ways of deploying apps, and will that continue to be maintained, and what's the idea for that? And then the second part is, there's obviously like you mentioned in the beginning, um, much like VMware and Tanzu, there's like several companies, right, that offer different services around the old Cloud Foundry. So now it's not just a community that is adopting this for the engineering reasons, but there's also like several commercial reasons, um, and several commercial, let's say, layers that have built like the proverbial onion on top of um, Bosch-based Cloud Foundry, and obviously they'll have to start considering the new thing as well. So I just wanted to explore a little bit of what things will be like for in both of these areas, right? So let's focus on the engineering and the community ideas first. And so what's that going to be like? Will the community continue to support um, new areas of Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes, uh, keep exploring, keep, let's say, innovating, and doing that, and support Bosch-based Cloud Foundry at the same time?
Yeah, well, I think I definitely want to allay any fears that Bosch or the Bosch-based systems are going away, because like certainly from a commercial perspective, we at VMware have still a very large customer base on that. They depend on it. They depend on us for support of that, and we really see the value in continuing to support that. I think one thing that we have learned over many years and even decades of IT administration is that even when you start adding these new systems, the old ones never really fully go away. Like there's still
Right.
mainframes out there that are
Right.
running important code because it just works, and it you may have to take on some of the maintenance cost of that, and but that's worth it to keep the systems up and running. And so I think we're fully expecting that even in 10 years from now, we'll have a substantial number of customers that are still running VM-based Cloud Foundry because those apps are just working there and it's working for them. And they've hit levels of efficiency and scale where it's still cost effective to run that kind of machinery. And so, even today, I think we're on the verge of having discussions across the community about what the next decision for that stem cell operating system will be. We were a little bit slow to get things consolidated on Bionic and to really get that up and running and done by the end of the Xenial timeframe in terms of the Ubuntu LTS distributions. But I think now that we've maybe disabused ourselves of the notion that there's just going to be this immediate transition over to Kubernetes-based infrastructure for everything. Like that's just not going to happen, even within the next few years. That'll be completely transitioned. That we're saying like, okay, we really need to get serious about like what does the ongoing cadence for this look like? What's the best decisions that we can be making around the sustainable life cycle, even at that operating system level, as far as the Bosch level of infrastructure is concerned. So 100% we see value in keeping that level of technology investment in the community, and certainly making sure that we're supporting our commercial customers at VMware with that.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And so now coming to, I guess, the second part of the question, where um, there's Bosch-based CF, there's a new Kubernetes-based CF, again for lack of better names, um, and there's a commercial ecosystem that's built around BOSH-based CF that that's very well established, entrenched in sort of the biggest enterprises, etc. And then, what's it like for the CF that's going to have Kubernetes at its core? Is there um, will the ecosystem just follow? Is there a challenge in creating a new ecosystem for that? Um, what has like the commercial side of things been like for whatever duration this has existed?
Yeah, sure. So, I think that's where we still see a lot of value in supporting, especially those developer concepts and abstractions on top of Kubernetes, both for continuity with existing users and customers as they start to get more and more serious about deploying Kubernetes infrastructure at scale, but also really as continuing them as useful simplifying abstractions on top of Kubernetes. I think as you start to get serious about running workloads on top of Kubernetes, trying to run your applications, you'll discover that even though it's miles ahead of what you'd have to do in terms of just managing individual VMs or some of the previous generations of VM provisioning technology, there's still a lot of complexity that you need to end up handling even as an application developer. And so I think that's where we still see those easy workflows and abstractions with CF being useful and relevant in that context, even for new users. That said, I think our focus right now is demonstrating that as a lot of those end users and customers who are invested in the current CF systems are grappling themselves with how to introduce Kubernetes infrastructure and how best to consolidate on it. We think it's most productive to be showing that we can be delivering a compatible experience for developer teams on top of Kubernetes infrastructure. And so, I think that's where we've been trying to strike the right balance of those concerns with where we've been going in the community. And so, even earlier this year, some of us from VMware got together for some sessions with folks at SAP and IBM and really hammered out what we thought some of the vision and guiding principles for what that CF app runtime experience and high-level architecture on top of Kubernetes should be like. And then more recently, we've all been working together to actually start driving that forward. Again, focused really on those developer interfaces and concepts and maintaining compatibility with those. But in this case, with more flexibility around more of the administrative aspects of the platform. So, I think one issue that we saw with some of the previous attempts at doing that was that there wasn't as obvious a mapping of some of those administrative Cloud Foundry concepts to what people might regard as the natural counterparts in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And the one example that really stands out to a lot of people is thinking about what those CF spaces are, where developers have that zone of autonomy. And I think the gut reaction from basically anyone looking at the system has been like, well, one of those things should map to a Kubernetes namespace in a cluster somewhere. And so that's now one of those organizational tenets that we're taking first and foremost as we think about that future-looking best way to bring these CF developer abstractions onto Kubernetes that wasn't present initially in some of the previous approaches.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, it's very interesting to sort of hear that there's going to be continued investment, continuous, sort of innovation, continued, R&D, so to say, in making this CF for K8s experience. And I think, it's obviously there right now, but there's obviously a long way to go in refining it and making it, I guess, making the developer experience better and improve that as much as we can. So, um, yeah, that's wonderful to hear. Now, I'm going to switch tracks a little bit and speak about the CF community in general. And I thought we could begin with, what particular areas that you have contributed to the most in, CF in general.
Yeah, sure. Happy to cover some of the places where I've had the deepest involvement. I mentioned really being there at the start of the Diego project early in 2014, and I think later that year I joined that team more formally as an engineer working on the code base, and then shortly thereafter moved into that more like engineering management, product management role for there. So up until about 2018, that's where I had the most of my focus. But one of the great benefits of working on Diego is that so many other pieces of the system touch it. And so, there's deep interactions and integration with the routing systems, and then obviously things like Cloud Controller are sitting in front of the Diego system to provide the workloads that are actually going to run on the system, whether that be the staging tasks to build droplets using buildpacks or the actual application instances. And so, at least from my perspective, that provided a great kind of central connection point to understand a lot of the rest of the system. And so, in some of the later part of that time frame, I started taking on more and more of the responsibilities across what was then the App Runtime Project Management Committee in the previous governance structure. And so I ended up leading that for the past couple of years. And then really about this time last year, we started getting serious about revamping the entire governance structure for technical contributions in the community. So I started getting involved in that and helping to close that out earlier this year. And then really appreciate that people elected me onto the first TOC to continue providing that level of guidance as we get this new governance structure up and running.
Yeah, I mean, listening to you talk, I can't but help feel that Eric is like 1,000 years old in CF. I mean, I think it's great to have somebody with that kind of experience on the TOC part of the community, leading a lot of the initiatives. And so, are there any pointers for folks that are looking at this, are sort of on the edge in terms of contributing? They're still on the fence. So, any message to like first time contributors?
Yeah, I think especially with the technical governance restructuring and revamp that's going on right now, this is probably one of the best times to start getting involved in the ecosystem. It's certainly a mature project. There's a lot of complexity in a lot of different areas, but there's plenty of places to get started. Even if you're just getting acquainted with Cloud Foundry and these systems, you'll probably be reading the docs, and there's plenty of things that need fixing or improvements in there. So that can be a great first way to even get a first commit into some of the repos in the organization. But beyond that, for people that are more technically inclined, I think there are a lot of different entry points that should be pretty accessible for people to get started. Even if you look at Cloud Controller, the architecture is effectively a Ruby web app, and the domain logic it's somewhat complicated, but it's not that complicated. And one of the benefits of adhering to the kind of test-driven development and testing philosophy that we have is that it actually provides a lot of technical documentation about the intended state of the system, what it's supposed to be doing. Again, you'd have to translate it into maybe some of the outward-facing consequences. But even if you look at some of the higher-level integration tests, that should be apparent if they're written very well. So if if you're someone who has experience working in that kind of web app, that can be a great entry point. I know that over the past few years, the team working on Cloud Controller had done a lot of work to refactor a lot of the code base so that it looks a lot more like a standard Rails app at its core. And so again, if you're familiar with that kind of app architecture and those frameworks, then you can really productively get started adding to that or fixing things there. And then one of the great things about the code bases in Cloud Foundry is that there is a lot of there are a lot of other languages. It's a very polyglot code base. So over the years, we've developed a lot of components in Go. That's certainly the case for Diego, as the name indicates, but also for the routing systems, like the Go router and the logaggregator systems. Those have all been written in Go, which, from an engineering standpoint, I found to be a very accessible language. I feel like even if someone's new to it, but they have a rough familiarity with C-like languages, they can get started and up and running with that in a week or even maybe a few days. So I think maybe the last thing to emphasize there is that one of the things that I've really valued about the Cloud Foundry community is how helpful and welcoming people are. And that if you show a lot of interest in contributing to a particular area or you want to get involved, we will take the time to explain things to you and to walk you through the code base and to help you get started. And maybe the one caveat that I'll state is that if you are coming in with a big ambitious feature or something that could be a big impact to the system, we'd like to understand the value that it provides. Like, who's really going to be using it? How does it fit into the overall principles that we've had around separation of concerns and roles, especially within the app runtime? And why would it be important to who you think is going to use it? And so, again, I think for first-time contributors, I'd expect people to try picking off smaller things. But we really want to make sure that we're for larger things making the right decisions about the long-term health and coherence of the system that we're developing.
Got it. And do you find that folks in the community belong more to sort of the app development persona or platform operations persona, or is it like a healthy mix of both, and it gives a good opportunity to sort of cross-pollinate and exchange ideas?
Yeah, I think in terms of people who've become more dedicated contributors in the code base, we've even seen a good mix of people at VMware. So some people come in with more of an infrastructure background. They're used to working on lower level systems or used to working with the idiosyncrasies of different operating systems and the deep functionality of things like the Linux kernel. But one of the ways, actually, really how Pivotal got started was as a development consulting firm, and so we've even now at VMware continued to have a strong consulting practice around both platform development and app development, and we've seen a lot of great contributors come from more of that application-oriented side, where they've been just wanting to run web apps to solve more consumer needs or enterprise needs, and have found either that their skills translate directly into the architecture of many of the Cloud Foundry systems, or that they get really passionate about helping to build the kind of platform that they find is valuable to run on top of.
Yeah, and I think that bringing their experience and sharing that with the community in terms of this is how I expect the system to behave, and bringing that domain knowledge, I think, is obviously super useful. So to anybody who's watching, obviously, if you folks are interested in sort of getting in and finding this opportunity to contribute to Cloud Foundry and to cloud native slash PaaS slash very interesting technological pieces of software, I guess. It's you're more than welcome. So I guess the best place to begin would be to join the Slack, ask a few questions. Obviously, be mindful of other people's time, and it's I think the best place to start. So um, I can tell from personal experience that the community has been very welcoming, and I've had a ton of support from various quarters in the past year or so, and yeah, it's definitely a pleasure to share the joy and share some of the learnings with others. So um, yeah, definitely take the opportunity to try and participate, I guess. um, yeah, and so I'm going to sort of abruptly switch tracks once again. And I just wanted to chat a little bit about some of the other projects that the foundation also manages, specifically Paketo and buildpacks. Um, so obviously, historically, buildpacks have um, also been there in Cloud Foundry, I guess, since the beginning, and they're like the key piece of how the app, how the source code gets transformed into something immutable that can be executed, I guess. But so, what's the future for that? So is it going to be Paketo going forward for all of CF, or what's like the story there?
Yeah, sure. So I think actually this was a little bit before my time, but there was
Mhm.
a deliberate decision to adopt the notion of build packs. So that was something
Okay.
that originated with Heroku.
Yeah.
I think even as early as 2008 or 2009. And the first version of Cloud Foundry did have specific language runtimes and frameworks
Okay.
that it supported. And so I think one of the best decisions we made very early in the project was to incorporate that extensibility mechanism into Cloud Foundry and then to keep investing in it. And so, for quite a few years, we had kind of the CF flavor of build packs. And then there were kind of in parallel those Heroku build packs that worked pretty much the same, but there were some incompatibilities between them.
Okay.
And then I guess probably maybe about 4 years ago now, we saw a lot of the technology that was emerging around OCI images
Mhm.
as a packaging specification for deployment artifacts. And I think if there's one major defect of the previous generation of build packs is that there wasn't like a definitive artifact that they produced that was more portable or more obvious across platforms. Internally, in fact, today they still build a droplet, which is basically just a tarball of the assets. And that's great for internal efficiency. But it's not great in terms of like developer mindshare or having some kind of special thing to extract from the platform and
Right.
to move around. And so I think the combination of seeing that emerging as the open source specification for what had come out of the Docker and container community, and then realizing that there's actually a lot of interesting structure to take advantage of here to build on top of in terms of increasing the sophistication of the kinds of operations that we've already built into things like Cloud Foundry. So that really provided the impetus to think about like, well, what's the next generation of build packs on top of this technology look like? And so that's what we've brought forth in terms of what's now called the Cloud Native Build Pack spec, which is now part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation's set of projects. But then that alone is just a spec. It's just a set of standards for what Cloud Native Build Packs should do. And so just as we had developed build packs for the languages and frameworks that we'd seen to be most important for users of the Cloud Foundry platform as just part of the core system there, we thought it was really critical that we develop that same set of important language and framework specific build packs for this new generation of build pack spec and technology. And so that's what we've been building within the foundation as the Paketo build packs. So I think we're really excited about the momentum in general that build packs are getting, and we want to see the Paketo versions of those build packs for these languages really be widely adopted, because we've been certainly building all of the lessons that we've learned over the past 8 years and plus of supporting build packs in a CF context into the design and the features of all of those. So I think that's also where over time we'll see convergence within the Cloud Foundry app runtime on that set of build packs. So whether that is fairly directly in terms of running them through systems like Kpack in a Kubernetes context. So again, that's a much more immediate pathway to integration and use of that next generation of build packs. But the other thing that the build packs teams have been refining and exploring has been even just porting those cloud native build packs back into the V2 system that runs them in the existing app runtime. And so I think we'll get a lot more development and incorporation of those over the next 6 months or the next year or so. And I think there, not without good reason, there are some incompatibilities between the CF build packs and the Paketo build packs for the same language version or framework. And some of those actually are even just natural evolutions of what the interface should be. I think, over time, we've even made changes to some of those interfaces for configuration in the build packs themselves. And those have been associated to major version changes within those build pack lines. And so there's going to be a certain amount of that transition here as well. But being able to present the cloud native Paketo build packs within an existing CF app runtime on VMs in parallel with the previous versions of those, which is possible today even with the way that platform operators can manage build packs in the system. I think that'll ease a lot of the transition and consolidation onto those build packs, where there are any minor differences in operation.
And obviously there is the idea of convergence that's inward, which is BOSH based CF, and I guess CF for K8s and or systems that use Kpack and systems that don't all start to use the same kind of buildpacks. But is Paketo being positioned and worked on as something that is specifically to serve the CF ecosystem, or is it more broad-based, more generic, and irrespective of whether or not folks are using Cloud Foundry, Paketo can still apply to a lot of other platforms and general infrastructure out there?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, Paketo, I think, stands on its own as a great implementation of actual language-specific build packs for those languages. And so even if you've never heard of Cloud Foundry App Runtime or any of that platform, but you've heard of Cloud Native build packs and you want great ones to run to actually make images for your application code bases, then they're certainly applicable there. So one of the great things about having the CNCF really supporting the build packs standard for Cloud Native build packs is that it's getting a lot more traction and adoption within other platforms and other infrastructure providers. And so that means that there is now this larger ecosystem and portability of build packs, where we've got certainly we've got Google and Microsoft and other folks building build packs, and we've got even independent vendors starting to develop them. So So I think, within that, we would love Paketo to shine within that, because again, of the lessons that we've learned and the opportunities that we have for partnerships with those language communities themselves. But yeah, they're definitely usable, in really any context where you need to build an OCI image container to run in a containerized platform.
Yeah, I was just curious. So from whatever I had seen, it definitely seemed to suggest that Paketo has very broad applications and is being, I guess, groomed and built as an independent project that can serve the larger the community at large, and does not have to be CF specific, I guess, like some of the older buildpacks efforts. So um, yeah, I would really love to see Paketo take off and really um, make an impact, so to say, especially like you say, with the help of folks who are you know specifically invested in a lot of different languages and runtimes and other frameworks.
Yeah, and just thinking about it a little bit, that's actually another great way for people to get involved in the community. Is that's one of these key extension mechanisms that we've had for the platform, but that we're seeing be valuable across containerized platforms. And so if you either see like a language that's not represented that you're invested in or think would be well suited to representation in that suite of build packs, or even if you are an expert in a particular language or framework and want to see it supported within an existing language specific build pack, or then that's a great way to get involved, specifically with the Paketo community, because I'm sure that they would love to see people with that kind of expertise getting involved and really building the best experience that that we can all provide through the Paketo build packs for those specific language communities.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great idea to start with Paketo and you know work into the CF community, I guess. But yeah, just looking for questions. I think there was just two. One of them was the vendors, or what's the plan for replacing Diego with Kubernetes? And I think the other question was the inverse of it. What are the plans for making BOSH um, based CF de facto, considering K8s is grabbing all the attention? So I think we've answered that sufficiently.
Okay, good.
Yeah, interestingly, just two questions, each a complement of the other. So anyhow, um, yeah, but yeah, I think it's a good point where we close. Any concluding thoughts?
I just want to say I'm really excited to see the new governance structures getting up and running. I know it's been a little bit slow in August, but that's typical of August, and I'm seeing us pick up more steam and momentum as we come out of everyone's vacations. And so, yeah, really looking forward to having that all up and running and seeing a lot of great contributions from people coming in.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eric. It was wonderful having you here today. Getting to hear all of these uh, Cloud Foundry anecdotes, I guess, haven't heard before. And just generally sharing a lot of information about where things are headed, and I think it's very important in the sense that it gives folks a reassurance of sorts, or it really puts the future of what they can expect on some very firm footing, and I'm really grateful for that. And obviously, it's challenging technically to build and maintain a tool that can do as much as CF does. Uh, but I think there's a lot of other non-technical aspects as well uh, that that influence the whole sort of uh, ecosystem of what CF is and what it can do. And it was very interesting to hear about those aspects as well. So yeah, thanks again. For those who are watching, thank you for joining us. Hopefully, you had a bunch of questions answered about what the foundation does and how things work around here. But if you do have other questions or like follow-ups and stuff like that, reach out to us on Twitter um, at Cloud Foundry. We make sure that I'll make sure that I find Eric and get the answers. And, um, and yeah, but otherwise, stay safe. Have a wonderful, you know, rest of the day, um, or end of the day, or almost next day, as it is here in India. Um, but yeah, thanks for joining us. The next live stream we have is a week from now, and features another member of the TOC, and Lee Port from the gov.uk PAS is going to join us, and share some perspectives about Cloud Foundry and cloud native systems in general. So yeah, thanks again, Eric. It was lovely having you here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Ram. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Bye, everyone.